In our 2020 graphic design trends video, we talked about an emerging style using lines and distortions. In this video, I will walk you through a fairly complex technique using Photoshop's Displacement Map filter and the timeline panel to create a unique typographic animation. First of all, we need to create our displacement map. Now, this needs to be a separate Photoshop document. So when you set up this document, you can use whatever size you want. I'm going to use a square format, 2000 by 2000 pixels. But most importantly, I'm going to set the color mode to grayscale. So once that's selected, that means we only have one color channel, and that is 8-bit. So it's 256 shades of gray, essentially. We can click on Create. Once we click OK and the document is created, we can start adding our text. Now, this can again be anything, but I recommend to use something that's bolder. Any font that has bolder characters, like Heavitas is a good one. I have the link in the description below if you want to find this font. I'm just going to use the word type just for convenience, but I'm going to break it up into two lines. Now, this you can do with a single text layer. It's probably easier by just pressing enter between the letters like this. And I'm going to use kerning. Alt or Option key left and right arrows is the way you can very quickly refine the spacing between the characters. Make sure you have enough space between each of the letters because we will be using Gaussian blur to blur out the details. And this is needed for the displacement map for this technique. So something like this, I think, is enough. But if you want to also increase the leading or the spacing between the lines, you can select all by pressing Command or Control A, and then Alt or Option up and down arrows is the way to do it. It's probably better to have a little bit even more space, something like this. Now, once you're ready, you can press Command or Control Return to make sure you accept these changes. And then you can position the text somewhere in the center of the artboard. Now, you can still use Free Transform to increase the size, but I think this will work okay. Maybe I'm going to increase it slightly. So Free Transform is Command or Control T, and then Alt or Option key to increase the size from the center point. Press Enter to accept the changes. Now we can add the Gaussian blur, but before we do it, we should also turn this into a smart object. Luckily, we can use smart objects inside grayscale documents as well, so it doesn't have to be RGB. So we can just simply right-click here on the layer and then choose Convert to Smart Object. Once that's done, now we can use any filters and adjustments as smart filters, which keeps them non-destructive, so we can always come back and make changes to the settings. So let's go into Filter and choose Blur, Gaussian Blur. Now, there's plenty of other blur options, but this is probably the easiest one to use. And I'm using 50 pixels for the radius, but it really depends on the size of your text and also the size of your document, what setting would be best for you. Notice how much blur I have on the text, and you should have something similar to this. We can always come back to make changes. I might need to refine it a bit, but obviously the less amount we use, the less blur we will get. So I am going to keep it at 50 as before. So I'll just type in 50 pixels and click OK. Because we set it up as a smart object, the Gaussian blur effect is something we can easily toggle, turn it on and off, and by double clicking on it, I can come back and make changes to it. So fully non-destructive. Now all we have to do is to save this document. I'm going to use the shortcut for File Save, Command or Control S, and I'm going to call this file Displacement Map. So that's all we needed. We just press Save. Now it's time to create our next document. So once again, Command or Control N to create that new document. But this time it will be an RGB document. So we switch the color mode to RGB, and I will keep the same size for the document. So it's 2000 by 2000 pixels. It's always worth matching the size of the displacement map and your artwork document, because then you won't have any issues with the boundaries and missing details. So now that we have this new document, I'm going to start creating the pattern or the lines, for which I'm going to use the line tool. Now you can also use the rectangle tool. It doesn't really matter which one you start with, but with this one, I'm going to just draw a vertical line for now. So holding down the Shift key, you can make sure it's a perfectly straight line. And you don't have to go beyond the document boundaries in the beginning because we can always extend the size later. But what I will do is to zoom out a bit, Command or Control minus, and then I am going to use the Move tool and Alt click and drag to duplicate this line. You can also hold down the Shift key just to keep it moving only to the right and not up and down. And then I'm going to make sure I have both layers selected by Command or Control clicking on the one that wasn't selected before. And then still using the Move tool, Alt click and drag, duplicate both of them together again. Now, I wish there was a faster way in Photoshop to do this. In Illustrator, you can just use the Transform Again command to duplicate multiple items, or you can also use the Blend tool and then create as many steps in between two objects on the edges of your document. But here we have to do it this way. It's still not that bad because as you can see, what I'm doing, I'm selecting all of the previously created lines and then I am duplicating them again and again. And of course, now I have loads of shapes that I can select all by using another very handy shortcut. It's Command Option A, or on the PC, Control Alt A. That selects all the layers apart from the background layer. This is actually a shortcut I recently started using and I find it so useful. Now, there is also another shortcut at this point I'm using, which is Command or Control E, and that's to merge these shapes into one single shape layer. The good thing about this is that we still have vector objects. So when I select them, I can select the anchor points and they are completely editable, but now they are all combined into one single shape. And to make sure that this will work for you, when you are drawing your shapes, also double check that you are drawing in shape mode. So not pixels and not path, you have to use shape mode. What color is set to, it doesn't really matter as long as you have the shape mode selected. Now that we have all of these lines, you might be wondering why I didn't align them to each other. And that is because I can always come back and select them with the Path Selection tool. That's the black arrow tool here from the toolbar. And you can also use the shortcut A to get to it. But once you have all of them selected, you can go to the Distribute option and choose Distribute Horizontal Centers. That will make sure that they evenly spread out. For keeping things non-destructive, we are going to turn this vector shape layer into a smart object. So right click, convert to smart object. I'm going to also rename this document and I will call it lines just to keep things simple. And now that we have this saved as a smart object, we can double click on the thumbnail of the layer. So here, double click, which opens up the source of this smart object. And now we can do the rotation. So Command or Control T for free transform. And then holding down the Shift key while rotating, we go to 45 degrees. Press Enter to accept the change and then save these changes. Command or Control S, so go to File, Save. And once that's done, when we close this document, the Smart Objects source, we go back into the main artwork where we can see the changes already showing. Now, the reason why it's better to start with vertical lines is because that way your smart object document is set up aligned to your original document. It's always better to set up a smart object without any rotation. So keep it either horizontal or vertical, whatever you place inside it, and then do rotations and transformations already once it's saved as a smart object. Now that we are back here in this document, there's one last thing I'm going to do, and that is to add some color. So first of all, I'm going to get rid of my background layer. I've just selected it and press backspace. And instead, I am going to use a layer called Solid Color. For this example, I'm going to use black color, but it's very easy to set up whatever color we need and change it later on if we change our mind. So I'm going to click OK and then drag this layer underneath the lines. But we can't see the lines yet because they are now black on black. So what I'm going to use is to double click on this layer to get to the layer style options and then choose color overlay. Now, make sure you save this document as well. I will save it into the same folder, but this one I will call artwork. So I know exactly which file is which. We have the artwork and we have the displacement map. And finally, now we got to the most interesting part, combining the displacement map and the artwork. So the way I'm going to do this is by having this smart object layer selected with the lines, and I'm going to use a filter. This filter is called Displace, and you will find it under the Distort category. So once you select Displace, first of all, it will ask you what scale you would like to use. I'm going to come back to this and show you what it means, but for now I'm going to use 2020 and I will use the default settings. So I will click OK and select the displacement map. That's the most important thing. Then we click Open. And what happens, as you see on my document, is that it creates already some distortion on this document. But because of the settings we used, it's not looking great at this point. But luckily, because we set up everything non-destructively, we can go back and make amends. So the first thing I notice is that we have probably used too much blur. So if I go back to the displacement map, I can go back to the Gaussian blur effect and maybe reduce it to 30 or 35. Let's just see. Yeah, I think that looks better. And then once I save these changes, I can go back to the artwork, double click on Displace Filter, which once again is a smart filter. Unfortunately, you have to keep going back and reference the original map file each time you want it to update. So it's not something that you can skip. You have to do this to refresh it. Now, to make the effect work better, we will also use the displacement map inside the artwork by placing it in as a linked file. So if we go to File, Place Linked, and select the displacement map, this is going to create a separate layer, which you will see showing up here with a little chain on it. So it's a special type of smart object that's source is not embedded in this document, but it is referencing that file from my computer. So the reason why I've done it this way is because if I make changes to that file, this layer will automatically update. Now, to make this work, we have to also change the blend mode of this layer to multiply, and see immediately just by having that little bit of shading already helps to make the text more legible. So just to show you without the shading, this is how it looks. Quite hard to see what's there, but once I add the shading, it's immediately much easier to see it. And now we got to the point where we can make refinements. Since everything is set up non-destructively, we can go back and edit all the values that we used. Let's start with the displace effect or filter. If I double click on that, we can start increasing these values. Let's see what happens if I change the horizontal scale to 50 and maybe also the vertical scale to 50. So we just pump up the values much higher. We have to still go back and select the map again. And what you will see happens is that the distortion is getting stronger. Now, interestingly, you can also use minus values. So maybe let's set the vertical scale to -50. If I click OK, select the map again, we will see that it's actually going to neutralize the effect. And this is because I'm using 45 degrees angle on the lines. But what happens if we are changing the direction of the lines? So while keeping the displace effect 50 and -50, I can double click on the lines smart object and use free transform, shift click and drag, put it back into vertical lines, press enter, save these changes and go back to the artwork. Notice that with the same displacement, now we are actually seeing only the horizontal distortion, because vertically we have straight lines and vertical distortion is not going to be noticeable. Similarly, if I go back again to the shapes and I turn them all the way to the side, so 90 degrees angle in this case, press enter, save, and go back to the artwork. Now we are only seeing the vertical distortion. So horizontally, there's nothing noticeable with the displace effect. And personally, I prefer the 45 degrees angle, so I'm going to set it back to that, but you can experiment with whatever size you want. I'm going to save this, come back here, and go back to displace and set it to maybe 30 and 30. And I'm going to click OK, select the map again, click open, and there we are. So hopefully with this example, you can now understand what the horizontal and vertical distortion means in this case. And you can always expect the lines to be more and more distorted the higher this value is. So if I set it to 100, for example, and I choose the map, we can see it's getting much more distorted. It almost looks like water, which is also a really cool effect, by the way. So it's all about being creative, have fun with anything that I showed you here. Don't just simply blindly follow every step and every value. Feel free to experiment, because you will probably come up with really cool results that can be much better than what I'm showing you in this video. Before we continue, I just wanted to let you know about our creative membership program. For a small monthly fee, you get access to over 200 hours of Adobe certified online training courses. Master all the tools and skills needed to become a professional graphic designer or illustrator. As a pro member, you will get mentoring from me and my team, access to webinars, student forum, and creative briefs to help you build an outstanding portfolio. Pro members can also download the project files for all of our YouTube tutorials. Sign up at yesimadesigner.com/memberships and start your free trial today. And now, let's head back to the tutorial. Now, since we are doing everything non-destructively, there's also an additional advantage. We can simply redo the changes between the displacement effects. So I can use Ctrl-Z to go back, Ctrl-Shift-Z to go forward, or simply redo from the edit menu to see before and after, and we can decide which one is best. I actually prefer this lower amount for the displace effect. And then, of course, we can also change the color simply by going back here, select the color, and then play around, find whatever color works best for the effect. We can also adjust the background color. Don't forget, that's also there. So if we want to have a similar color, maybe something like this, almost looks like water now, we can do that. Or we can find something like a complementary color, so on and so forth. Once again, endless variations you can come up with. And don't forget, you can also adjust the text itself. So we can always go back to the displacement map and change the text. So it's still an editable text as long as you go inside this smart object, where you can make amends to the text, you can change the font, you can change the alignment, whatever you want, and you can also adjust the Gaussian blur if you wanted to. But not only that, you can also go into the shape layer and make amends here. So for example, if you want to make the lines thicker, you can select all of them and then add a stroke size on them. Just make sure when you use this, you need to go into the stroke settings. So you have to click here and make sure you choose the alignment to be set either center or outside. That way you can see the changes you are doing. So if I drag on the stroke value here, and as long as it's the same color, it's going to look just simply thicker. If I now save the changes and I come back to the artwork, see how immediately it looks different because the lines are thicker. And this is also completely non-destructive, so I can always come back, select these lines and set a lower value, maybe 3 pixels for the strokes, save these settings, go back to the artwork, and I can see it updating straight away. And now we got to the final stage and most exciting part to create the animation. All you have to decide is what property would you like to animate. The thickness of the lines, the rotation of the lines, the displacement effect, whatever value you are choosing is going to affect obviously the final result. For simplicity, I'm going to use the displace effect animation where we are simply just animating the intensity of the distortion. So for this, I am going to start with the lowest displacement. So I'm going to go in displace and select 0 by 0 and click OK. Select the map, click open, and it just flattens out the lines. And I will also set this shading layer on top to 0%. So I'm going down to 0% there. So no distortion, just completely flat lines. I'm going to save this file as a separate JPEG. So go to File, Export, Export As. I have a custom shortcut set up for this, F7 or function 7, but you can use whatever shortcut you prefer. Make sure you save it as a JPEG and save it with the original size. Save it by clicking on Export and save it into the folder where you have all the rest of the files. The important thing is to make sure you add something in the file name that will remind you of the settings used in that file. So in this case, I'm going to type in 4 zeros, which I will know that there is no displacement used here. So I'm going to click Save, and that's the first file saved. Now let's go back into Displace, and I'm going to start adding some distortion. I will just start with maybe 5 and 5. Click OK, select the map, click OK again. There's that subtle difference there. And I'm going to also increase the opacity by pressing maybe 5 on the keyboard. That's actually 50%. use 0.5, that will be 5%. So that's just a shortcut to quickly adjust the opacity. Now we can go back to export this file and we will save it once again as a separate file. We don't have to make any changes here. It will remember our settings. Just hit export and make sure you use the values, in this case 5 and 5. Export, and then so on and so forth. You need to continue saving as many steps as you have time for. It's a bit time consuming. You can probably create an action to simplify this process if you are doing this often. But for now, I'm just going to skip ahead and show you the final result once we have all these images ready. I selected all the exported JPEGs and I'm going to drag and drop them in here. Once I do that, I can just simply press enter a couple of times and notice how these layers are generated here on the right. And this is why it was important to name the files, because I can see those all showing up here in the layer names as well. Now that we have all of these ready, and just so you can see, I can turn the layers on and off, and then it creates the animation already. But we need to turn these layers into frames. So for this, I'm going to use the timeline panel, window timeline, click on create frame animation. And this will start with a single frame here in timeline with whatever is visible currently in your document. And that's for us, the top layer here. But I'm going to turn all of the layers into frames apart from the background layer, which I'm going to just quickly delete. That's using the backspace. Now we can go into the panel menu, so the timeline panels menu, and choose make frames from layers. Once I click on that, it generated these 13 frames for us, and we can already start playing this. And you see what is happening is the animation. So from those saved layers, and it's already repeating or looping itself because it's set to forever playing itself. The only problem now is that it skips. So it goes to the end result and then jumps back. And there is a very quick and easy way to create a repeat animation just by duplicating the frames. So all you have to do is to select all the frames and duplicate them by holding down the Alt key, click and drag, drop them here at the end. Just remember 14 is where it restarts. So 13 to 14, there is still a jump. But what we will do is to select the second batch of frames and go to the panel menu again and choose reverse frames. It will only reverse your selection. And now if I'm playing it, it's going to have a nice smooth transition. So it's going back and forth. There's the distortion and then it disappears. So this is just one of many ways you can again utilize the timeline panel in Photoshop and come up with the best feature or property that you can animate. I hope I managed to inspire you, and I would love to see what you create with the things you've learned from this tutorial. So if you are creating something and sharing it, make sure you tag us with #YesI'mADesigner. That way we can also feature your work and show it on our channels. Thanks a lot for watching. Like and share this video if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified whenever we release new videos. Click on the link on my right and start your membership today to get access to over 200 hours of training courses and personal mentoring by me and my team of creative professionals. Have fun learning, guys, and I will see you in the next one.